What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on the Wizards website. And this week, we're back with more M19 stories after our brief hiatus last week. And we have this week, Chronicle of Bolas, Whispers of Treachery. Once again, by Kate Elliott. So, my quick review this week is that this story was not quick, but there was a very good reason for it, and I thought this was really good. I don't want to give too much away in the quick review in case you haven't read it yet. I would say just go read it. It's a very good culmination of the first three, and this one as well, so you probably need to understand those first, but yeah, I recommend this one a lot. I don't know about you.
My quick review is, it's very long, but go read it. You have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, take the time investment, right? It's going to be a time investment, but take the time and go read it, because it was definitely an enjoyable one and a necessary one. So, that being said, you know, the link to that, as has been more recently, is down in the description box below. So feel free, if you haven't read it yet, click on through to read the story, check out the awesome art, etc. And then come back here, because, you know, give us your opinions. Tell us what you think, and then listen to ours and see whether you agree, disagree, etc., and let us know in the comments. So, on to the full review itself. This week's story was the mid-season finale. And I'll talk more about that at the end, but we had the continuation of Tae-jin telling his story to Yasova and her granddaughters and the rest of the clan, but really mainly those three women. And he's telling what he knows of Ugin's tellings, and for why the women need to travel to Ugin's grave on Tarkir. And with that, we get the end of that portion of the story. And it came to a pretty logical end.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I thought it was great. I thought for this one that the setup of Tae-jin and the women was not as important, but I don't know, based on the cliffhanger that they left us with, I don't know where it's going to go next week, so setting them up into the cave and describing where they were may be pertinent for what happens to them at the end. So, you know, while reading through the story, it was like, oh, that kind of that beginning part was a little lame, right? Oh, he's a ghost fire warrior and he, you know, let's heal his wounds. All right, well, we're going to go check and make sure this place is safe. You tend to his wounds. And there was like a little bit of small talk. And then Yasova came back and was like, okay, tell us the rest of the story. And then he told the story. So, like, that part to me seemed a little bit irrelevant. But like I said, then at the end, when it was capped off with more of that story and you find out that something has landed there. And one of the scouts was like, you know, hey, Yasova, you better come see this. We will see what that is next week, and it may then become pertinent that, one, we learned a little bit more about the fact that Tae-jin is a ghost fire warrior, but also learning about their location where they kind of hold up to keep safe. So hopefully I'll be able to retract that next week and say that, you know, it did turn out like it was important. But this week, I guess because of the gravity of Ugin's story portion, it made that first portion seem a little irrelevant. Plus, as Amy mentioned, because it was so long, it kind of makes me look back and be like, what could have been cut out? And so, you know, for that, I was a little taken aback by that one section. So, I don't know. Agree, disagree, thoughts on that?
I don't know.
All right.
There were a lot of different parts. I don't know. I felt like it jumped kind of a lot. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I felt like that during the story. But I think now, after the fact, it seems weird that I felt like that, because I feel like it didn't. Oh,
see, I think I know what you mean, and I have that written down here. I think we can talk about that, because I felt similarly.
Okay.
And we'll see. But first, it starts off, when we get into Ugin's story again, starts off with them back on their birth mountain. They're still above the Hunter clan, and we see Chromium come up as a human, which I thought was kind of interesting because I don't remember the original Chromium from Legends well enough. I haven't even, excuse me, looked it up to check and see. Because on this new Chromium card, the fact that he could become a 1/1 human with hexproof and lose all abilities, etc., and just kind of transform back and forth, that seemed odd to me. But again, since I didn't remember the card in Legends, I assumed it was a nod back to his older abilities or his story of, what he had done previously as a legend. And the fact that in this one he did show himself in his human form to the twins, the Nickel and Ugin, and say that he was assimilating himself among the humans to try to learn more about them, which makes perfect sense because they are dragon hunting, dragon killing humans.
Yeah.
So Chromium being the intellectual, as we saw from him the first time we saw him 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, when he said, hey, stop bringing your craziness over here. I'm just here observing the water and you're scaring the things away. Like, that seems to be a much more, at least blue-white aligned, right, character of, let's sit, let's observe, let's see what's going on. And yet, then, he became a little bit more ruthless and said, I've been with them, this is what their society looks like, let's kill them.
Yeah.
And you, I think, were the one that mentioned that it was such a swap, because now Nickel was like, why kill them? Once he heard about their society, he was like, I like them. And Ugin's like, Nickel, what's wrong with you? They killed your sister, you were super upset.
Yeah, I was like, so role reversal much?
Yeah, and it really, started to, not that it hadn't already started, but it started to show Nickel's kind of mentality.
Over Ugin.
Control over Ugin, but his mentality in general of just, now he's devious. Before he seemed to be much more primal and angry and much more willing to just fly in, shoot fire and leave, but now he's becoming more intellectual. He's becoming more, like I said, devious and cunning would be the word I would use. So you get to see that and I think that it shows really nicely the fact that dragons in I think all forms of fantasy have often fought amongst them or within themselves between their kind of ravenous feral nature and their intelligence, because they are ancient intelligent beings, but they're also monstrous beasts. And so there's that moment even in this one where Nickel flies down and just bites the head off that messenger, and Ugin gets upset with him, and Nickel says, do you want them all coming for us when this messenger tells his story? And yet, just earlier on, he was like, why kill them? So
right.
It's such a balance for all of them. Chromium, Ugin, and Nickel in this story run the full gamut, which was so interesting to me that you get to see that contrast even within the same story.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of imagined a scale.
Okay.
And, one of those, two-sided scales, and it's, always sort of teetering on almost balance, but it never, actually just stops moving, So it very, very often for each of them was just always doing this sort of, slight back and forth, and they just were never at ease in the way that they should have been.
Right. And I think some of that goes to what I'll touch on in a minute as well, and what we kind of talked about a minute ago. But one other thing I wanted to point out before that, and tell me if I'm derailing you in any way, because I thought that you were done, but I want to make sure I don't cut you off. I enjoyed the class system that was brought up with the hunter group, the human hunter group. The fact that the chief kind of said, hey, I've been chosen by the gods or God or whatever, divine being, and my heirs will be the ones to take over. And the way to determine my heirs is any of those who have been touched by dragon blood or drink or eat of dragon blood are the ones who are my heirs, and any who have not serve me and my heirs. That's such an interesting way of handling that, because sure, it didn't reference dragons, but think about royalty. Think about oligarchies. That's no different. A lot of times it's, oh, this is the royal bloodline, and anyone who is of the royal bloodline, they are the rulers and everyone else isn't. And you're not in line for the throne if you're not of the royal bloodline. And I just thought that that was interesting, where it wasn't this chief's blood, but dragon's blood, because they built their entire village on the bones and bodies and pieces of all of these dead dragons that they were able to kill.
See, I kind of saw it differently than that.
Okay.
I sort of saw it, because what he really said was, it doesn't matter how related to me you are. It matters that killing dragons or eating dragons or drinking dragons in some way has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me think more of a religious aspect, less bloodline and more if you are a devout follower of whatever religion I believe in, that is how you are my heir.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort of a disciple kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw that basically completely the opposite way you saw it.
Fair enough.
I think.
No, fair enough. I also appreciate, speaking of that, I also appreciate the fact that I feel like anytime we have a big question in one of these episodes or in one of these weeks, the next week or the next episode, it's answered. Like, why the hell did people sprint under Ugin to raise their head up and just be splashed by a giant droplet of dragon blood?
Yeah.
Now we know, because they were so desperate to get that dragon blood into their system that they were willing to do that. And especially dragon blood that had been envenomed. Because that seems like a terrible idea. It seems like a terrible idea to drink dragon blood that you've put venom into that is venomous enough to kill a dragon. And then little itty bitty humans that are like getting splashed by this giant bead of, you know, a droplet of blood that is the size of their bodies, and they're drinking that. It just seems terrible to me. They didn't say that, but, you know, that's what I envision, is that the chief is like, oh yeah, just drink dragon blood, it'll be great. And then, like, that droplet comes down and they die, and, you know, the chief's like, oh, another one? Great, fine, get me more slaves then. You know, and just having to replace his slaves over and over, because they're ravenous for this blood, because they think that that's what will get them to get out of their service or into the good graces of, you know, their religion, their chief, whatever. So, yeah, I thought that was a bit interesting. But to go back to what we were talking about, and it leads into kind of the overarching theme of this whole thing, and kind of goes to your concern of feeling a bit confused and that it was jumping around. This story is being told by Ugin.
Yeah.
In its entirety. And because even at one point, it kind of cuts away from the linear storytelling aspect for Ugin to say, and you, my children of Tarkir. And it's like, oh, right, you're talking to the Jeskai, even though Taejin is saying this to Yasova and her granddaughters. It's still Ugin telling it to the Jeskai, who are writing it down, and Taejin learned it. So, and yet,
because it is the letter. It doesn't matter who's reading the letter. The letter was still written by Ugin, so it's still in his voice. Right. And so, but it just seems so odd because it cut away, and it's combined with the fact, and this is, I think, what you were getting at, because I had a similar issue, was the fact that Ugin seemed to be so confused this whole portion of the story that he was telling, because he's like, oh, I don't know whose voice that is, and then he later finds out it was Nichols, or
he just has these voices in his head in general and doesn't really attribute them to anything weird. He just reiterates what he heard, even though it doesn't make any sense for him to have heard these voices. So, and I mean, we come to find out, I mean, I mentioned this last week, or well, the last story that we had of this, which was 2 weeks ago, but I mentioned this then, which was that Nickel is messing with Bolas's mind. Or I'm sorry, is messing with Ugin's mind. I said the same person.
Right.
Nickel is messing with Ugin's mind, and Ugin just doesn't know it because
he's messing with his mind.
because he's being brainwashed. But at the same time,
I'm brainwashing you, but also when you realize I'm brainwashing you, don't think I'm brainwashing you. Just treat it like it's a normal thing.
And not only that, but excuse me, I think that until the end of Ugin's portion of the story, at least the end of this story that Ugin was telling, I don't think Ugin truly believed or wanted to believe that Nickel was capable of that.
Right.
Was capable of messing with Ugin's mind. Because as he says, my brother, my twin, right? This is the person that you should, I guess in Ugin's mind, that he should be able to trust above anybody else. Human, dragon, or otherwise. This is his twin brother. And to find that because even saying at one point in this story, like, Chromium may be smart, but he's not my twin. And then at the end, for him to realize, like, it doesn't matter that he's my twin. He's been messing with me this whole time. He doesn't have my best interest at heart. He doesn't care about me. And Ugin says he never did. I don't know that I fully buy that he never did, but for a while, I would say at least since the trip to Arcades' place, he never did. And whether that's Arcades or Arcades, I say Arcades, but I could be wrong. But regardless, that fact that Ugin's just being messed with this whole time, I think that's what leads to the confusion in this story of it jumping around and stuff, because it's being told from Ugin's point of view, and Ugin has no idea what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
So that's what I took it as, because otherwise, I agree with you. Otherwise, yes, I was thoroughly confused in a number of different points here. So yeah, that definitely was what I was thinking when all that stuff was going on, and especially because Ugin is sitting there saying that he wasn't able to put two and two together with the fact that the son, the forgotten son that Bolas was manipulating, was going to go fight and kill his father or his sister or whatever, or the heirs, the wife, right, the second wife. Ugin wasn't putting together that that's what the son was doing, was mobilizing an army to do that. I'm sitting there going, you're Ugin. How do you not see that? That seems pretty damn blatant. Yeah. Nickel is trying to manipulate him, the son, into going off and helping Nickel's plan of killing all these people, and honestly, Chromium's plan as well, right? Killing all these people so that they'll stop hunting dragons like this. And instead, Ugin doesn't notice it. And like I said, at first I was very confused by that, and then I understood it fully. Because it was, one, Ugin wasn't willing to accept that his brother was capable of this, his twin was capable of this, and then eventually just that he was just being messed with. His mind was being messed with the whole time, and so of course it was hard for him to see it. He was under, Ugin or Bolas's control. So
yeah, there were a lot of references in this story to abuse. Yet again, in this story, I think, of course, the Ixalan stories with Veraska were sort of our last big
foray into it.
Yeah. But this one, there were so many lines in there that I was just like, yep, I've said that exact line. Yep, I've said that exact line. Yep, I've said that exact line. And just, hearing it is very interesting. Having those things just blatantly verbalized like that is, I think, great. Because as a reader who has been through that, it's good to hear those exact lines. It's good to hear those things verbalized in that way, because I know that having gotten to where I am, I had to come to those realizations and be able to verbalize those things myself. Which really just means that other readers who don't realize that they're being gaslighted on a constant basis, maybe, at the time of reading these stories, might start to realize what's happening and might start to be able to understand and verbalize those things as well. And that's really important for your ability to heal.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, I think it's great. I think it's really great that not just these particular stories, but magic stories kind of in general at this point in time have really deeply discussed things like that, because it's, at least for me, it's a really cool, really big deal. And people can say that it's not representative of this and that and the other thing, but as somebody who's been through years and years and years of being lied to, being manipulated, being, just living my life as a person who had to come to the realization that the people who were supposed to care the most about me never did. Just never did. And that's, the fact that someone else who is going through that now can read this story and get even somewhat closer to a point where they'll be able to understand that and accept it, that just makes me so happy.
Well,
so happy.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I guess I am fortunate enough to not have that life experience, but in my own head, from reading this story and hearing other stories from people here on Earth as well, once you have come to that realization and come out on the other side, and that's not to imply that there's an imaginary line, it's definitely an ongoing process, but for someone who at least has had their eyes opened, so to speak, about it, I feel like it's perfectly natural to ask the question of, where the hell do I go now? What do I do next? And that's this moment at the end of this story where Ugin sparks. He says he feels the spark in his heart, he feels the spark in his mind, and he planeswalks for the first time and is now on a different world, and he says that he now feels welcome and comfortable there, because the last place where he thought he felt welcome and comfortable, he was wrong about that.
Yeah.
And he didn't know it at the time, because that was his life, and that was all he had ever known. And so now, hopefully, he will be in a place where he can feel welcomed and at home and have it be real, as opposed to following somebody around or being with somebody who was not truly there for you.
Right.
So I thought that was a cool way to end it, and I thought, because like I said, obviously then there was the cut back, and I actually appreciate, now having read it, I appreciate what you said, where when Ugin sparked and then that story was over and it jumped back to Taejin. Do you remember what you said?
Yeah. I said that sounds like a good ending to the story. And then there was more.
And then there was a little bit more, and it felt a little cheap to me because I feel like the Ugin ending would have been better than the seemingly forced cliffhanger that we got, because the whatever it was, Earth Mother or whatever, you need to come see this, that doesn't mean anything.
Right.
It could be a threat, it could be a beneficial thing, it could be Ugin, it could be a Tarka, it could be Ojitai, it could be a long-lost tribe member that we're going to meet next time. So it...
But I will say, in contrast to that point, that I think it was important that there was more after that, because it kind of reminds you that just because he came to that realization and sparked doesn't mean that's the end of his story.
Right. And that's the other point I was going to make, right? Because it that would be a nice tie-off to the entirety of these stories, even though this is the Chronicle of Bolas, right? So this may be a tie-off to Ugin's story, because now we've found out Ugin's spark moment, which I did not know previously. I don't believe that it was something that was known prior to today, but I am not that entrenched in older lore where I would have learned that. So as far as I know, that was the first time that story had been told, at least again, Ugin's spark, and we'll see where it goes in the coming weeks. But with that being the ending, and even the cliffhanger with Yasova and her clan, I wanted to just bring up the fact that, to step out of the story itself and talk about the story's impact on us, the readers, and the world of magic and magic story. I really appreciated the fact that this story ended the way that it did, and the fact that it was story 4 of 8. Because that's really important. And it also somewhat leads me to understand why they didn't put this story up last week during 4th of July, Independence Day here in the States. Because originally I was like, who cares? Just schedule the upload, right? It's not a huge deal. And then just let people read it on Independence Day. But because of the fact that this was your mid-season finale moment, as I mentioned at the top, for people who might be out celebrating with family or on vacation and not able to read the stories like they normally would, along with the fact that Wizards staff were on a vacation, right, because it's a national holiday, I guess to that degree it made sense to me. And again, especially seeing the impact of this story, you don't want a story like this to be overshadowed by anything, because we've talked about that in the past where it's like they put the finales at the same time that they start previews for the next set, where they're like, oh, here's the previews for the next set, guys. This is amazing. Look at all these new cards coming out. By the way, the story's done, but all these new cards, and it's like, that's so rude that like you're diminishing it like that. So in this case, I have to praise, right? I always try to give credit where credit is due, because I never want it to look like I'm just here bashing people the whole time, because that's not what this is about.
Right.
I'm here to call out good stuff when I see it, and call out bad stuff when I see it, as is my opinion. And then have any and all of you, if you disagree with me, to correct me, or to give me your opinions as well, because I love not shouting into a void, right? I'd rather be able to hear that feedback and say, hey, you know what, Joe? I didn't really agree with you that time. And I can't count, I can count more times than none the number of times where people are like, I agree with Amy more than Joe on this one, which is perfectly fine. Amy has amazing points. That's kind of the idea. Because I need that contrast here.
Well, but the show's not about the contrast either.
No, because a lot of times we agree on stuff, and so then we look to you guys as well. But the reason I bring it up is because when these stories became more prominent in an online forum, it was mentioned, and I don't want to incorrectly attribute it. I believe it was Allison who said it, but if it was not, I apologize. I believe it was her who said that she wanted these stories to be a method for which people could come every Wednesday like they were watching a television show. And they could read every week a long-form short story that cumulatively per set would work as a little mini e-novel. And you would get a new episode each week that would culminate with the finale. And then at the end, you would have the entirety of the story to go back and read through. And I love the fact that this acted, especially in contrast to Dominaria's stories, this acted as your mid-season finale, because through the 12 stories, we were up to episode 8 or 9, and I'm like, when is stuff gonna happen?
Right. We're still sitting there going, wait, this is still like the rising action. If you think about, how a story goes, we haven't reached the climax of the story yet, and there's still so much more to talk about.
Right, and we're
on
3/4 of the way through.
8 or 9 by this point.
Yeah. It was like a little upsetting, and I mean, obviously, depending on who you talk to, there are people who had massive problems with Dominaria's story, a few problems with Dominaria's story, and I think we're somewhere in the middle. We had some pretty glaring problems with it, but regardless, with this story, I really appreciate it. I mean, I've liked this story from the start. I haven't kind of tried to hide that at all, because I don't think that's necessary. But with this one, with number 4, with the mid-season finale, I thought that they crushed it. I thought that, and they being Kate and the entirety of the story team that she was working with, I thought that they did a really good job of closing this prequel portion of the story, and then moving on to what will still be the past, because this is not present stories. This is all about the Chronicles of Bolas, but you've now reached the moment where Bolas and Ugin split off. That's it. That part's done, and it took half of the stories, but that was really important. And I like the fact that it seems like
there's still half left.
Yes. And I appreciate the fact that it seems like it's going to be split, because if you look at the card set, right, there are mythic rares that are just reprints of valuable cards, and that's great, that's important. But what are the mythic cycles that you think of in this set M19? You think of the Elder Dragons, and you think of the Planeswalkers. Well, with those two sets, the first half of stories were about the Elder Dragons. So I assume, I could be wrong, I have no inside information, but my assumption leads me now to say that because they are in these stories, that that they are in this card set, that the latter half of these stories will be referencing Nicol Bolas's relationship to these planeswalkers, namely Sarkhan, Tezzeret, Ajani, Liliana, and maybe even somehow Vivian. I'm not sure how or when she comes in, but I'm curious to see it. Okay. But that's what I assume we're going to get starting next week, is obviously more of Yasova and her granddaughters, and traveling through and finding out how we get the next portion of this story to be told, because now Tae-Jin's knowledge is done, so maybe we do just get to Ugin's grave, and now Ugin is going to be there to share some insight about Nicol. And where his life continued on to be after Ugin left. But again, hopefully we now see how these planeswalkers play into Nicol's story and his chronicle, if you will, going forward. That's my assumption. We'll see where that goes.
I'd like to see how allegorical it will probably be if they visit Ugin's grave, and there's and a lot of things happen. Mm-hmm. It might turn out to be, there's a lot of different ways that could go.
Yes. Well, and especially because Yasova even referenced Sarkhan this week and said that she saw Ugin and Bolas fighting. Not that she named those two, but she saw those two fighting. Saw Sarkhan.
She said Bolas, didn't she?
I don't remember. Maybe. No, because she mentioned that he poofed away in gold or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And that he was able to walk between planes.
She thought that wasn't Bolas.
I don't know.
Even though she had referenced Bolas earlier.
I don't know. Because I know that really this story was just to tell her about planeswalking, and she was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense now. I get it." Which is a little weird, but we'll talk about that in the weeks to come. So. As long as that's... Are we good on this one? Do you have anything more that you wanted to add?
No, feel like this story was so good. It was long, and I didn't like how long it was, but that's really the only gripe I have.
Well, and
I mean,
again, the bits of confusion in there, I think were written, like, they made sense to be in there. I think the problem is you have to work on a contrast between showing confusion in your main character and that confusion spilling over to your reader where they kind of
Right.
get lost a little bit.
Right.
So I think there's a
they
balance
have to
there.
put up a barrier of some kind.
Right. I think there's a balance that needs to be drawn there a bit to make sure that that's not something that happens frequently. I would say that I don't think it made this story bad by any means. Again, it was a little confusing, but
it made it odd.
Yes, well, and you know what? Maybe it just means that it warrants a second read. Now that you understand what the through line is going through it, we have not had the opportunity because we wanted to get in front of all of you and,
Right.
and film this, but maybe it just warrants a second read, and that's why it feels that confusing the first time through,
Yeah.
is because the second time through is when you're gonna get it and be like, oh, right, okay, I get it now. Makes sense.
So if any of you guys have read it twice and you feel like you've figured things out a lot better the second time reading it that you didn't necessarily understand the first time, please leave that in the comments because I feel like that would be really interesting to hear. If you haven't read it twice but you feel like, hey guys, you're just totally missing the point, here's what it is, please leave that in the comments.
Yeah. Any and
Because
all-
we really want to hear that too.
Any and all agreements, disagreements, etc. with us or your fellow viewers and commenters, please feel free to do that. Amy, would that be an example of somebody showing off their...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
Totally not as forced as last week, I don't think. Anyway,
Sure.
okay, maybe it was. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this week. Let me just put in some plugs here at the end so that you guys are aware of what's been going on. Last week, when there was that break for Wizards, we were not on a break, and we finally got a chance to talk about the Battle Bond lore that was presented to us. It wasn't quite a story, but it was lore, and we spent some time talking about it. It was a little bit of a shorter episode than usual, and if you have a chance, I recommend that you go check it out. I'm sure it'll be linked here at the end for you somewhere. The other thing is, this past weekend was the pre-release for M19, and hopefully you guys got to go out and enjoy your pre-release experience. We definitely did, and in doing so, we opened 4 kits of Dominaria pre-release kits. Sorry, not Dominaria, we did that already. Of M19.
I was like, wait a minute, what?
No, of M19 pre-release kits. We're going to have more on the channel, so stay tuned for it. But if you missed that video of us opening the 4 kits, we got some pretty cool stuff among the 4 of them. Pull rates for me personally were real bad in non-videos, so I'm hoping that in the coming weeks when I open some more, because I definitely have some more, spoilers, because it's me, hopefully those will be a little bit better because my openings in store for my events were real bad. Let me put it to you this way. If and when you watch that video or watched that video, out of the 7 kits that I opened in total, 4 of them were in that video. The only mythics I opened, you'll see in the video. So out of all of those packs. So stay tuned for that coming up in the future, as well as checking out that video. It would help us out quite a bit. What would also help is if you click that subscribe button when it pops up over that thopter in between our heads.
And tell your friends.
Yes, that helps as well. Sharing it or just telling them to come check us out, that helps out quite a bit.
Maybe you know somebody who's into magic more than you are. You know, maybe you're like, well, I stumbled across this video, but whatever.
Yeah.
But maybe you know somebody who's less whatever.
And any of you that checked us out following DAM314's stream, our friend Dave that we joined last week, or that you checked out Dave's stream because you knew we were going to be there, thank you for that. We will keep that link down in the description for you guys if you're interested in going to check out his Twitch stream. In general, he plays video games without us sometimes, most of the time. And
All the
like,
time.
yeah, and like I said, if you go check some of his backlog, you might see the one with us in it. So that was a really fun time. We enjoyed it. We played some Jackbox Party Pack games. So
Yes.
that was a lot of fun. So again, all of that being said, thank you for watching this episode of JaAR. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. from us here on Geek for All, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.